Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are listening to the Podium Podcast from. Welcome back to the podcast for today. Of course, it is the 2025 Bahrain Grand Prix race review, in which Oscar Piastri took what was his second win of the 2025 season as he further cements his title charge to his teammate Lando Norris in what was, to be fair, a very, very interesting race. A race full of strategy, a race full of overtakes, a race full of action, which is what Formula 1 needed after what was a little bit of a dull Japanese Grand Prix. As we normally do on the channel, of course, we're going to go and look at all the events that happened around the 57 laps of Bahrain. So, as we do, let's turn a page in my notebook and look at the start, as it was Oscar Piastri who started on pole, with George Russell in third, as he was demoted one place for a grid penalty, as Charles Leclerc took second, and I think it was, who was fourth? Fourth was, it might have been Gasly. But the main story after this was that Lando Norris and Max Verstappen were starting P6 and P7 respectively, which, I mean, it was a bit of a poor session for Lando Norris. But regardless, let's look at what actually happened in the race. And it was Oscar Piastri who had a fantastic start going into turn one, with the likes of George Russell and Charles Leclerc closely behind. Russell trying to make a move on Leclerc around the outside in turn one. However, it did end in a lockup and nearly going into the back of the McLaren, which was interesting. Further down the field, it seemed Lando Norris had actually had a false start as he crept towards his grid box and went just a little bit over the yellow line, which resulted in a 5-second penalty for the British driver. Regardless, he managed to get up to P4 or P3, I believe, on the opening lap, but that was, of course, mainly down to having a little bit of an edge in the start. Further down the field, we look at people like Oliver Behrman, who actually made it up to P13, compared to his teammate who was already in P9, I believe, and Max Verstappen, who actually dropped a place down to P8 because he did not really get a good start and was more focused on just trying to make the best out of what was a poor race. By lap 3, Piastri opened up a second gap to George Russell in P2, with Norris just a little bit behind Russell in P3. Also, Leclerc was overtaken by this time. But as Antonelli was making some incredible moves on Carlos Sainz, it was Isaac Hadjar that pitted first on lap 7 to start the first kind of stops, mainly due to just the Grand Prix being very high-tech around the Bahrain International Circuit, which resulted in a lot of strategical differences, which, I mean, was great for Formula 1 because it showed that people were trying something different, trying something that wasn't just the same thing over and over again. But for the front, back out front, as Piastri did say that he was starting to struggle on the soft tyres, he pitted for lap 15 as to try and, prevent the undercut from Russell as he pitted a lap before, and also Lando Norris, who pitted a whole 2 laps earlier on lap 11 as he had to serve his 5-second penalty. But it was by lap 18, as Piastri, Norris and Russell did pit, it was a Ferrari 1-2 as they did decide to go onto the medium tyre first to try and do a longer first stint. As Ferrari were called into the pits, Leclerc was on the radio trying to persuade his team to allow him to do a one-stop, e.g. Italy 2024, but I think that as Verstappen was put on the hards in just the first pit stop, it seemed that they already knew that the hards were going to be difficult to perform well in around here. So they decided to pit both Ferraris, Leclerc and Hamilton, for another set of medium tyres. At this stage of the Grand Prix, around the middle mark, it was, of course, Piastri out in front with Russell, Leclerc, Norris and Gasly, who made the top 5. Pierre Gasly was having an incredible race, but disaster this strike for Verstappen and Antonelli, who did pit again, surprisingly, which was, I mean, they were put on 3 stoppers, But it was a safety car that was called out after Sainz and Tsunoda made little but still severe contact into turn 1, which resulted in a 5-second penalty for Carlos Sainz, and it did result in a lot of debris chucked around turn 1, which forced a safety car. This meant that the top 5, or pretty much everyone on track, pitted. For the top 5, it meant that Piastri and Norris were put on medium tyres as Russell was put on softs, and both Ferraris had no choice but to go on the hard tyres, and they thought that the softs were going to be just too soft, I suppose, for 24 laps that were remaining. As the safety car pulled away, it was Piastri who got, as normal, a really, really solid start, and it was Russell and Leclerc who were not scrapping with one another, but were in contention for that second place. Further down the field, we also had Carlos Sainz going right into the side of Andrea Kimi Antonelli at turn 10, which resulted in a forced retirement for the Spaniard and a 10-second penalty, which I believe he has to serve in Saudi Arabia. From there on, it was smooth sailing for Piastri out in front, as Lando was catching Charles Leclerc, and after a series of failed attempts going into turn 1 and turn 4, Norris finally made a move on Piastri, Leclerc for P3, and with only a tiny amount of laps to go, I think it was about 3 or 4 laps to go, he was trying to charge after Russell, who managed to keep his P2 despite DRS problems and just brake-by-wire fails, whatever he was suffering from. But no one could defeat Oscar Piastri around the Bahrain International Circuit, who he took the victory by 11 seconds in what was a dominant display of speed, calmness, and great racecraft. So, that is a quick recap of what happened in Bahrain. Now let's go to the biggest talking points, which I'm going to have to say number 1 is, of course, the mixture of strategies, which I love to see on display. Reason being, it gave us something to think about, it gave us something to look for, and it gave us uncertainty, which we of course love in Formula 1. Compared to Japan last week, this was a lot better of a race, and it shows that strategy is still a very important ingredient in making a Formula 1 race interesting. You look at Japan, it was a one-stop, everyone pitted around the same time, everyone pitted around the same for the same compounds, same strategy. There was no difference in that, no offsets, no gambles, because it was just very difficult to overtake around there. But here, coming into Bahrain, they knew tyre degradation was going to be unbelievably high, which forced Pirelli to choose the hardest compounds, and also it made strategy a lot more interesting. People were, of course, thinking a 2-stop was going to be on the cards for certain, but what tyres do you use? Would you start on the softs? Do you go on the mediums like Ferrari did? Do you try something different? Do you conserve more in the first stint? Do you push more in the second stint? And that's what we saw. The timing boards, when we had it, were always moving, always changing, and there were people that were on different stages of their stints, which also meant for more action in on track, and it gave us action off track. Well, not off track, but in the pits, which meant also that the teams had more of a say in how well the race has gone for them, and it gave a very mixed field for most of the Grand Prix, which is great to see. If there was a red flag or like a safety car that we got, then of course it spices things up 100%, and that's what the high risk, high reward strategies for some of the lower teams worked. It did work, which is great to see. God, the DRS problem. Oh, also we'll talk about the safety. Well, this is a mixture of the safety car, but it was great to see also how the top 3 teams all try something different after the safety car. You had both Piastri and Norris put on the mediums. You also had Russell on the softs for 24 laps, which I have to say is fairly impressive. A very, very top drive, out of the top draw for sure. And you also had both Ferraris on the hards, which gave an uncertain feel as the safety car pulled into the pit lane. You're thinking, God, will something happen? Who's going to be who called it right? Which is something that we don't get much in Formula 1, but it was great to see. talking about timing board and DRS, well, how much of a flop did F1 have in regards to that? Not only was it poor camera work, which we saw in Japan, especially when Verstappen and Norris were coming out of the pit lane, and it was pretty much the only impressive, most memorable moment from the Grand Prix. But still, it was really poor around here. I mean, you had the last lap, I suppose, and for me personally, the last lap always has to go to the driver who's been leading the Grand Prix, because it's their time. It's also the time for the commentator to, really give that oomph of what the driver's done, which is to win a Grand Prix. And I mean, they focused on the battle for second and third. However, if you know by turn 10, I believe, that they aren't that close to what, or turn 11 after the last DRS straight of the lap. If you know that he's not going to make an overtake, why still focus on them going down the final, penultimate straight? For me, a bit silly, because, you should be giving that to Piastri because he's just done a great job. But I do like the idea of a mini box, but reverse it. Put the battle in the mini box, but put the main feed on the driver that's actually winning the Grand Prix. We also had the same thing with, I think it might have been Leclerc and Russell, or something like that. Maybe battle going into turn 1. I think Leclerc or Lando and I think it was Lando and Leclerc. They had a battle going into turn 1. Lando didn't really manage to make the move stick in turn 1. But you do realise that there's a whole another straight, and DRS straight, more importantly, going into turn 4, which is where a lot of the overtakes did actually happen. So you're thinking, oh, surely the camera will stick to that? No, they cut away to something completely irrelevant to the story of the Grand Prix, and it just ruins the feel for a viewer. I mean, it's the most basic of things, which I think Formula 1 seems to suffer. Similar with the timing board problem. You don't realise how much you actually depend on the timing board until it's gone. And it was a shame, because you didn't get to see what all the different strategies were, and what times they were doing, and how far they were to the next driver. And when you've got a close of a Grand Prix in the top 10, more especially, then it's really, really a pain in the backside to not really get the full experience, the maximized experience from it. But I mean, it was more for some reason on Russell's car more than anything else, because it seemed that his tracker or something kept on going in and out, because it always dropped Russell down to P20, then back up to P2, P20, P2, P20, P2. And then for a moment, I mean, the DRS problem was really annoying for the drivers behind, probably, because as the tracker was really unstable, the drivers couldn't really, have a automated DRS, I suppose, button. I mean, for the DRS, for the Formula 1 drivers, they get a DRS button, which, I mean, glows apparently, which means that they are in 1 second of the driver ahead of them. However, as George Russell's DRS malfunction, they didn't know if they were in the second of the car ahead, which meant that they had to almost judge for themselves if they were in the second of the car ahead of them, which meant that some of them might have, if it was close to a second the gap, then I think they might have left it and would rather not take a penalty, because if you take a penalty, if you open your DRS and and you're not in the second, then there is a huge penalty coming your way, which meant that some of the drivers had to back off because they didn't want to risk a P3 or the P3 for a penalty. I'll also say that McLaren had 2 very different Grand Prix for both drivers. I mean, you've got on one side of the garage Oscar Piastri doing a a superb effort with his P1, and he's done well. He's managed to convert a pole to a win, which is something that he had to do around Bahrain, because it meant that he is now fully in the championship fight. Qualifying was exceptional. 2/10 clear of Russell. You also had in the race 12 seconds down the road after a safety car restart, so you have to give him credit for that. Very calm, composed, faultless drive, flawless, as I think Russell called it maybe. But you go to the other side of the garage and you've got Lando Norris, who qualified in P6 in the quickest car. Had a bit of a dodgy start, of course, got a 5-second penalty. He then worked his way through the field. However, he did not work his way through the field as a champion should, in my opinion. A lot of mistakes, a lot of miscalculations on his side. If you look at his battles with Charles Leclerc in a worse car on a harder set of tyres, still managed to keep Lando at bay for a good 10 laps, which is something you wouldn't really expect from Lando Norris. Coming into turn 1, it seemed that he tried always the same thing. Leclerc would just park his car in the middle, Lando would be forced to go on the outside, there isn't enough space, he has to back off, he then tries to get in turn 4, he gets pinched to the outside, Leclerc has the middle covered. It's the same story, and he kept on applying the same, I suppose, strategy, same tactic, and it just didn't work. Which, if it doesn't work as a Formula 1 driver, you have to try something different. We look at it, we looked at Antonelli. It didn't work for him well. One time, going into turn 4, he might have tried something different the next time, and it worked. It paid off. You can't do the same thing because then the driver ahead of you will know what you're going to do. But also, there was a couple of lockups here and there from Lando. The qualifying was poor. It just seemed off the pace and just mistakes crept in. So, yes, he did get a P3. He is still the championship leader, sorry. But I think it was a weekend where he should have maximised and he didn't get the maximum out of the car. If he got a P2, I think then he would have done the best that he could. But coming into this weekend, I think he would have expected a lot from it compared to where he's actually come in this weekend. His ex-teammate, though, Carlos Sainz, had probably one of the worst weekends I've ever seen him do. Very, very, very good qualifying. Can I just say this? Very superb qualifying. Finally managed to out-qualify his teammate